And then Rynearson, who's a decorated military veteran who was detained at an Interior Border Patrol checkpoint.
What's going on?
How's it going today?
Good, how are you doing?
Doing well. Is this your vehicle, sir?
It is.
Hey, can you roll down your window? Is that as far as it'll go?
No, it can go down more.
What's that?
It can go down more.
Okay. You said this is your vehicle?
It is, yeah.
Do me a favor, go ahead and park over here for me, please, sir. Off to the side, I'll be with you in a moment.
Okay, can you tell me why?
Yeah, I'll be with you in a moment. There's a bunch of traffic over here. Just go ahead and park over here. I'll be with you in a second.
After this experience, I installed cameras in my vehicle. It didn't take long for my car camera to capture an unconstitutional stop. In 2010, at this same checkpoint, I was again ordered out of my vehicle. My boss at the military was called, and I was detained for 34 minutes, all supposedly to simply inquire into my immigration status, despite the fact that I offered the agents a passport and the agent declined my offer. Despite the fact that I answered every question they asked me, and despite the fact that I gave them not only a military passport, a personal passport, but also a military ID and a driver's license. I could not have cooperated more with the limited scope and purpose of the suspicionless checkpoint. And I know that the real reason I was subjected to that interrogation and that experience was simply because I had only rolled my window down enough to communicate and to pass any requested documentation. And that wasn't good enough for them. The video of the encounter is online, and it shows that immigration status was of no concern to the Border Patrol agents. I then filed a very expensive lawsuit to vindicate the limitations that the Supreme Court itself had told me existed when they made the exception to our Fourth Amendment. My suit went all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States, but it declined to hear my case. In that long legal process, there was only one judge who would have held the agents accountable. That dissenting judge, Fifth Circuit Judge Jennifer Walker Elrod wrote, quote, "Standing on one's rights is not an unorthodox tactic. It is a venerable American tradition. One cannot escape the impression that Agent Lanz's refusal to look at the passports and Agent Perez's irrelevant phone calls to Rynearson's employer operated as retribution against Rynearson for asserting his rights. Firm assertions of one's rights are far from unorthodox in a republic that insists on those constitutional rights and that takes and tasks the courts with protecting those rights," unquote. 4 other judges along the way at the district and appeals level ruled to dismiss my suit based on qualified immunity. I have had hundreds of checkpoint encounters, and I must say that it pains me greatly to have personally witnessed American service members give their lives overseas to defend our constitutional rights, while witnessing them routinely violated here at home at these checkpoints and in courtrooms without an ounce of accountability. And while knowing that many Americans, unlike myself, are not limited to a mere 3-year assignment to Laughlin Air Force Base and have to suffer these kinds of encounters routinely. If the interior checkpoints, suspicionless checkpoints, are to remain, then only Congress can ensure that they're operated within the strict limits of our law. It's my heartfelt wish that Congress will act to correct the glaring failures of our executive and judicial branches in this area. Thank you for your time.
Very much for your incredible testimony.
Richard, say your last name for me, man.
Rynearson.
Rynearson. Thank you, sir. I hate when mine gets chewed up, and I don't want to chew yours up either. So, you mentioned some of the questions we're going to ask. You said one statement. I'm just curious. Why did that Border Patrol agent, that contact your commanding officer?
Well, I think that Judge Elrod nailed it. I believe he contacted him to get me in trouble at work because I had asserted my rights. So, when he called my employer, he had 2 passports in his possession. So, it stands to reason if your goal is to determine immigration status of the guy who's already said, yes, I am an American citizen and has shown you a military ID and a driver's license, maybe it would be easier to look at those passports rather than call and go on an Easter egg hunt looking for a commander to have that
Intimidation,
conversation. I believe so. And indeed, following that encounter, they even went so far as to write a letter to my commander expressing their view that my conduct at the encounter, which you can see online, was not befitting a military officer.
Thank you, my friend.
Sir.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you very much. And again, I want to thank the panelists for being here. Mr. Rynearson, if I could ask you a question. Again, thank you very much for your service. I appreciate it. It seems like at these checkpoints you were being hassled, harassed, and you were saying probably because they were more interested in your travel plans than your status. Why do you think they were doing that?
Oh, I don't really know. My guess is that somebody above them has said, hey, you're going to go stand at this checkpoint and people are going to drive through and your job is to ask some questions and magically divine if they are illegal. Their drug dogs are not going to sniff out your immigration status. Asking somebody, are you an American citizen, is probably not the most effective way to catch people who are not in the country illegally, I'm guessing. So I would imagine they're just biding time. They don't. They need to ask some questions, and they probably realize that what they're doing is probably not having a real impact on the mission.
Once you started exerting your rights, though, once you started claiming the rights that you have, do you think then, though, things changed and they went a little deeper into hassling you or harassing you?
Yes, sir, I do. I believe that they'd pulled me aside. They would secondary me. It was because I had, said no to them. Never mind the fact that I've answered every other question that has to do, that's relevant, but not wanting to tell them, what I intend to do over the weekend, just that little bit offended them. So then I started to get the, lectures, you're the only pilot from the base who won't answer our questions, or, why won't you just tell us this, that, and the other? And then it became apparent to me that I was becoming known to agents there, so it started to just kind of get worse and worse.
Well, I want to apologize on behalf of the federal government for them doing that to you. They shouldn't have. Yeah. And so, again, I appreciate your service and thank you for being here.
Also, I think it was Mr. Tomczyk, you mentioned this. Well, who was it who mentioned that the agents of the CBP wrote to the military, Mr. Rynearson, wrote to your military commander? Mr. Tomczyk, is it within the purview of the proper duties of a CBP official to write to military commanders or private employers about the conduct of, with allegations about the conduct of people who pass through a checkpoint?
Absolutely not, sir. It makes no sense to me whatsoever.
So they have no authority to do that?
I am not aware of any such authority.
Mr. Rynearson, to your knowledge, was any action taken against these agents for going way beyond their authority in order to hurt somebody?
No, sir, there was no action taken to my knowledge.
Okay, and finally, Mr. Rynearson, you mentioned that you pursued a case against the agents there, and all the judges, bar one, ruled that they had qualified immunity. Can anybody tell me what's the extent of that qualified immunity and what the requirements are?
Well, the qualified immunity, obviously, there's some differences on what that means exactly. I think the judges in this case had the more conservative, it has to be on all fours perspective, meaning that all the facts would have to basically be the same for previous case law to apply.
What facts would have to be the same to apply previous case law?
I would guess that would be how they looked at it. They basically said that the facts of my checkpoint encounter, and you have to wonder how novel can a checkpoint really be. The facts were so different that they just decided, we're not going to rule on this whatsoever. And so I believe they just used that.
Never make new law or face new situations.
Right. They just decided to ignore their court's precedents, which made it very clear, and as did the Supreme Court, that anything that's beyond a brief limit, brief detention that's focused on the scope of the stop, inquiring into immigration status, anything beyond that is not allowed by the...
Beyond that is not covered by the qualified immunity.
Yes, sir.